Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Rejuvi 45. If you are here, you have heard this phrase called modern leadership. And modern leadership is the belief that you can have compassionate human leaders at the same time as you have fierce business leaders. So if that's something that speaks to you, we are so happy that you're here because that's what Rejuvi 45 is all about. My name is Regina Hepp, and I work at a company called the Rejuvi Venture. And today I am joined by my partner.
Charlie Jacoby.
How's it going, Charlie?
Good, Reg. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. We are in the, Charlie and I both work out of Minneapolis. And Charlie, you are definitely looking a shade more sun-kissed than I do today. What's up with that?
I got to spend a week on spring break. I have a couple college kids, and they were both off at the same time. So, escaped down to Florida for a week. So,
Mhm.
got to get some vitamin D.
Mhm. I think one of the favorite things that I heard, because your daughters are college age, and one of the favorite things that I heard was that all they wanted to do was to be on the beach, to eat, and to watch movies.
Yes, that's a good summary. It was great.
It's nice to know that some things don't change, even if they grow
Yeah.
up, the simple things matter. Well, we are here today with a topic. This is, my goodness, this is session 126 of Rejuvi 45. So we have been recording different types of sessions. This one is called At the Table. And it really is designed to talk about how um, the exclusivity that's typically associated with access to leadership development has absolutely changed. It's not, it is changing. It absolutely has changed. And before we kind of get into that, Charlie, did you ever, has that phrase ever been something that's been important to a group that maybe you've worked in, being at the table?
Being at the table as far as having good accessibility to what they're looking for
Right, or
from a
just being at
leadership
the table,
perspective.
right? Just like being here. Let me just tell you kind of. When actually, when I first entered some of my first leadership roles, and especially if those roles reported through human resources, finding ways to be at the table, to be a partner to the business
Yeah.
was really, really motivational. So this phrase used to be used a lot in earlier stages of my career, like finding ways to be at the table,
Yeah.
building your knowledge set so that you could be at the table. I don't know. So you and I grew up in very different spaces. Was that ever a phrase
Yeah.
used in your space?
Oh yeah, and I've used it extensively. Oftentimes, if I'm looking for a new opportunity, whether I'm moving within the company I'm currently in, and there's a unique opportunity, or I'm moving externally, one of the critical factors for me, and I always ask is, I'm really interested in having a seat at the table. And when I say when interested in having a seat at the table, it's as a leader at I would at whatever level, but I've obviously interacted a lot at the senior leadership level, and I'm always interested in the response to that question because it's a good indicator as to how the decision making process works in that team, that group, that company, and how open is it, and how willing are people to add additional opinions, thoughts, and input to that. So it's been hugely important to me personally. Now, I think what's interesting, and this is one of the things I've learned as a leader as well, is you can't just assume what's important to you is important to others. And if you assume that everybody wants to have a seat at the table as you define it, so like I would like I love presenting in front of big groups. I like to be part of quarterly business reviews, all that kind of stuff. Some people really don't want to be a part of that, right? They're more oriented to maybe making a different kind of contribution, which is really critical. So I think that's a when we talk about being at the table is different for everybody. And I think that's one of the things we talk a lot about at Rejuvi as well, is like it's so important to have the data not only, on yourself individually and the type of leader you are and what things motivate you and what things give you energy, but also your teams, the organization, and how that lines up to the overall organizational approach. Because everybody wants different things, right? And it's what you think people want, if you haven't really taken the time to understand that in detail and looked at the data
Mhm.
that indicates what they're looking for, you can, you get upside down. So.
Mhm. Well, I think, what I'm hearing you say is be respectful, as you look to the left and you look to the right and you look across the table to those who are directioning and decisioning with you. Well, we're going to be talking about at the table and how I think we're having a moment because so many things have changed. The framework for how we think about leadership has changed. It's changing. It has changed. The framework has changed. The bench has changed. Who organizations are asking to sit at the table, is different than what they asked of them even 5 years ago. And lastly, the learning and the application for how we help those people that are at the table have changed. And so we're going to be unpacking each one of these three things: the framework, the bench, and the learning and application. And all of these things, I think, put a lot of excitement and yet pressure on organizations to meet the moment and to serve leaders differently, so they are very, very prepared because we are in this at the table, having this at the table moment. So first of all, let's talk about the changing framework. So for folks who have been around Rejuvi for a while, are using Rejuvi, you know that we have used a very different model for how we help organizations to grow their leadership capability inside of the organization. And simply put, we believe that you can grow compassionate, uh, human leaders at the same time as you grow fierce business leaders. All it takes is that you really understand human growth models, and you understand the building blocks of those, as well as the building blocks of a sustainably growing organization, and you understand the building blocks of those. But the framework has changed, right? And so as we think about being at the table, and who is at the table, the framework for what we're asking them to do has completely changed. Charlie, kind of how do you experience that? And when I say those sorts of things, does it or doesn't it resonate?
Yeah, I think the framework has changed significantly, and it's hard to have any business discussions today without the mention of AI, right? And some of it's a hype cycle, but in my things have fundamentally changed because of AI. I have, it's clear to me. And so I was actually just reading earlier this week an article about that the leaders of today may be the last batch of leaders who experience who have the experience of managing human only teams,
That
which is
he's
very interesting. It's
Yeah.
fascinating, right? And Reg, you know that I worked in the intelligent automation space for a significant time over the last decade, and it was interesting because we had these robotic process automation capabilities, which were essentially software robots that would go in through the graphical user interface of software programs, right? And could mimic human interaction with those programs. So, like an accounts payable clerk who would frequently go in and enter data and sometimes have to enter it into multiple systems. Well, those tasks, if they were rule driven, could be done by a software robot, right? And so when when people are contemplating this, I was working with organizations that were like naming these robots and putting them on the org chart, and everybody be laughing, "Hey, you have robots on your org chart." Well, it's continued to mature now, and that those robots were somewhat limited by kind of that rules-based structure. Now AI has taken it, to a whole new level where you can have all this unstructured data contributing to, real authentic decision making that doesn't necessarily, it's inferred and doesn't have to be rules based. And so I think the reality is that, organizations and like the folks I was working with, now all of a sudden you're totally rethinking span of control, right? So used to be like, hey, if you're a leader, 6 to 10 people is a good span of control. Well, what if you're a leader and you have 4 human individuals on your team and you have 6 robots, but those 6 robots work 23 hours a day? The volume of processing and data that they're churning through and transactions that they're doing is exponentially greater than if those were your kind of standard human individual on a team that's working, 8 to 5 or whatever. And so you have to think about things completely differently. And of course, how you lead is different as well. And the types of skill sets that people on your team uh, have to kind of coexist and be successful kind of in this new world of work. It's we call it modern leadership. Yeah, yeah. A modern leader has to take all of these things into account now. It's very different.
Well, and I think you give a the perfect example. I've heard you talk about this, a small handful of times, and it kind of freaks me out every time you talk about it because, it's 2025 and here we are. Um, so when we talk about the framework for leadership has changed, and we start taking a look at the human piece of the equation, really or the individual piece of the equation. That individual may be human or that individual may be not. And all of that has to plug into a fierce understanding of how the business runs, right?
Yeah.
It's both of these things. And so it almost adds, the framework. You can say you've got this human growth model and you have this business growth model, but what I hear you saying is the human growth model is kind of forking out where you have humans, and then you have robots. And there's this piece, but these pieces need to work in conjunction with driving the sustainably growing business. And so when we start to think about how we prepare our leaders to work because the future of work has now arrived, you absolutely have to help them be at the table by communicating these frameworks that help them to run this business with the humans and the robots that they actually have. That's the new framework, right? Super exciting stuff.
And I think, just to add another kind of example to it, I think, what I've found really unique with Rejuvi is you have that kind of the tower of power, that core inner triangle, which is focused on kind of the internal side and skill sets of a leader. But then you couple it with the outside, we call it the backwards Z, but it's basically how do you apply it to your business planning and business model and execution model, right? And I think what's fundamentally changed with these frameworks and why that framework is so important is the days of command and control are over,
Yes,
in my opinion, because for one fundamental reason is look at the power of compute that you've put in the hands of all these individuals across organizations at all levels.
right.
And it's absolutely impossible for leaders who used to try to stay on top of what all their people were doing and would pride themselves on being able to recite, all the details about what their people were working on to their boss or their boss's boss. Well, if you're doing that today, you're missing opportunities and you're unempowering your people. And candidly, individuals in your organization are not going to stick around with that kind of without giving them the broader reins to be able to do what they can do now with all these capabilities. And I think that's where kind of if you think about how the Rejuvi model in the intent portion of the Rejuvi model of why it's so important for leaders now to be able to talk intelligently and constructively about what is the intent of the team and the intent of what they're working on, and then how you equate that to how things get, implemented in a broad sense so that people can, operate in with much broader guardrails than they had in the past. So that framework has evolved significantly.
Yeah, I love when you talk about strategic intent and the parts and pieces of it, and then you start to connect that to, you know, any given leader might have 4 humans on his or her staff, and 12 robots on his or her staff. Those robots are going to help take that strategic intent and they're going to help with the process and the capacity, right? What do we do? How fast can we do it? And like you said, those are working, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So anyway, really exciting times. And I think just kind of taking it back to the big picture, leadership movements are occurring inside of organizations and across the entire globe. And they're having this kind of at the table moment. And the first piece of what that at the table moment is all about is what we ask of our leaders has completely changed. The framework has completely changed. And so you really need to have your arms wrapped around what that actually means. But it's not just kind of the framework has changed or what we're asking of our leaders, who we're asking to lead something and who we're inviting to the table has completely changed too. The framework has changed, and guess what? The bench has changed. And there's this great piece that's been published by Boston Consulting Group that talks about the organization of right now is fractal. And so, it used to be where you would have a core, this core organ, the heart of the organization, where this collective group of C-suite individuals, we're leading everything. And now what's happening is energy is being shifted to the field. Any energy is being shifted to the lines. And so all leadership is occurring in all these parts and pieces of the organization. And what does that mean? That means for organizations, think of this like a organization that is now more fractal or is hub and spoke, or maybe they have, like a franchise operation. You have to make sure that you're preparing all those fractal pieces, right? Each and every one of those spokes, each and every one of those franchises to prepare them for leadership. And that doesn't just mean, for example, let's take a look at one hub. One hub might have a general manager, right? One hub might have, some sort of, key leader, but they're going to have lots of line leaders or team leaders there doing work. They're going to have project leaders doing work. They're going to have sales leaders building that book of business for that fractal unit or that franchise. They're going to have service leaders implementing all or a piece of the customer experience. So um, organizations all organizations are asking more people to lead something than they ever have before in history. And it's so exciting because more people now get to go, woohoo! People are excited when they get promoted, right? People are proud of being moved to, for example, a supervisory role, or they're proud of being moved to a manager or a director level role. Now, what we also have to do to meet this at the table moment is to make sure that the way that we help them to grow, the data and the analytics that we're giving them, and the models that we help them to run this fierce business in this really compassionate way actually meet the moment. Everything has changed, right? The bench has
Mhm.
changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just look across industry right now at, the well, I would say traditionally, where has the primary focus on leadership development been? It's probably been in the upper middle management, senior middle management, and executive ranks, right? And often other people that are paid to lead, supervisors, managers, et cetera, were left behind, right? And I think if you look across industry now at some of the trends, there's been a pretty significant reduction in that kind of middle management, upper middle management layer, partially, you know, what's contributed to that is part of what I was talking about before with the enablement of, this technology advances in AI and et
Power of
cetera.
compute, as
Uh,
you say. Yeah.
yeah, power of compute. And so, we need to make sure that we need to make sure that there are, offerings, capabilities available to a broader reach of individuals that are now the more people that are being paid to lead than ever before, or and need access to this kind of data and information. So
I think about some of the leadership training that I've had in my life, and one of the most I think significant concepts that was presented to me early on was was the facilitator went to the board, back in the day, it was probably a chalkboard, but they went to the board, they went to the flip chart, and they drew this really big arrow. And then inside of the big arrow, they drew lots of little arrows, and some were going up, and some were going down, and some were going backwards, and some were moving in alignment with the large arrow. And they talked about really one of the roles of a leader was to create alignment, for all the parts and pieces of a particular unit. And I think what's so exciting is that because who we're asking to lead things, because the bench has really changed, just this very simple concept of helping all of these people, right? The supervisors, the team leads, the project leaders, to understand that very important concept called alignment. We all have to be moving in the same direction. What is that direction that we're headed in? And having a voice in creating that direction. And when we feel like we're getting off of that direction, how do we make decisions as a team to make sure that we stay on course and course correct if we need to? I still just remember that, and I bet that was 30 years ago when that very
mm,
simple concept was presented, but it remains a primary component of what leaders need to do. It's just that now we have to make sure that all people paid to lead, see that very simple graphic. I think that for me is what is so exciting when you take a look at this conversation that we're having today called At the Table. And there's three things that are creating this at the table moment again for the space called leadership and those who care about developing leaders to actually meet it. And one is the framework has changed. What leaders actually do has changed. And then the bench has changed. Who we ask to lead has changed too. But what I think is really creates some absolutely a masterful moment is when you put the who and the what together, because we've seen it at Rejuvi where you work with one department, one function, one franchise, one spoke of the hub. And you work with all of these different types of leaders inside of these places, and you help them to understand the new concepts of how you run this fierce business, beginning with you need to be working in alignment, right? So where are you going and why are you going there? And how do you make sure everybody can stay on that pathway? That to me is what's really cool, is putting these two things together called, yeah, the framework has changed, but just make sure that framework is getting to all the people that are actually paid to change. And that's exciting stuff, right? Because then you can start to say, hey, if this particular unit has these, 3 to 5 grand priorities, right? We're trying to meet this type of of commission. We're trying to meet this type of net new clients. We're trying to meet this type of market share. We're trying to have this type of net promoter score. Everybody can understand how they contribute to that, right? Doesn't matter what level of leadership you're at, it can be done.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I personally think it's powerful when we talk about the Rejuvi model with the two fence posts, right? There's the model, and we talk about kind of the core components of the leader, the core components of the business. That's one side, and then the other fence post is the tying data to results, right? And like how has the growth of the leader and the team of leaders, then how does that contribute to changes in key performance indicators that are mapped, right? And I think the ability to show that is amazing. I've been through a bunch of leadership training myself. I think that the two big things that I saw, one, everybody would come from like, a 4-day leadership training event or whatever and be all jazzed up, get back and realize that, ooh, I'm gonna have a hard time applying everything I learned within the culture and the business model and approach that I have back at work, right? And those two things, if they don't come together, then you're not going to get the benefit. And the other was really the way we measured, like, if that investment was a good investment as an organization was really on opinions surveys, kind of non-empirical data based result. It was more opinions on what did people think of the
Mhm.
course, or the
Yeah.
activity that they went through. And it was less about, well, is this really making a business in our I'm sorry, is this really making a difference in our business as it relates to OKRs, KPIs, or however you're measuring your business results. So I think
Mhm.
that's a
Mhm.
fundamental
I
difference of what we're trying to do.
I was just, and this kind of gets into the third reason why we're having this at the table moment in terms of how we grow, how we now are capable of growing our leadership talent, growing our leadership capability inside the organization. The framework has changed, the bench has changed, but the learning and the application has changed, right? The learning, the application has completely changed. And I want to, you talked about, fence posts. And I was just having this conversation yesterday with a colleague around when in the past, the gold standard for how we try to understand what sort of difference a leadership thing made was we tried to understand, did our leader, how did they react to it? Did our leaders learn something from it? And, kind of what difference did it make in terms of did they do some things, and did those things that they did actually influence, the outcomes of the business? And you try to get this understanding of the return on investment of the thing. But that is yesterday's gold standard, because now with advanced analytics and emerging tech, and it's why we say the learning and the application has changed. Really, what organizations now are able to do is to understand how much capability do we actually, leadership capability do we actually have, right? It's like, it's like a volume sort of thing. And they're able to understand how that volume is going up or down. And when the volume goes up or down, you can start to understand whether or not that change is or is not correlated and causated to the outcomes that actually matter, right? So that's the kind of conversation. We opened up this Rejuvi 45 session today talking about whether or not in our careers this phrase called being at the table, being invited to the table, wherever really part of our vernacular, and they were. But I'll tell you what, the advances inside of our understanding of what it means to grow a leader inside an organization absolutely helps every single person, every single business leader, every single leadership facilitator, every single director of sales leadership training, every single vice president of talent development. It puts them at the table, because now what they are able to do is to help their business change the kitchen table conversation that they can have, right? Because now they get to say, okay, let's take a look at all of our sales leaders, right? Maybe they call them district sales leads, or, whatever it may be. Our organizations have different ways to talk about their sales leaders. And by the way, most times these sales leaders do not have people reporting to them, right? They are responsible for booking business, right? But you can start to understand with this new leadership framework, right? Really strong human capability, really strong ability to run the business. You can start to take a look at incremental changes in every single part or piece of that business, and know what it is doing to the outcomes of the business, which is so exciting to me. I can't even tell you how many times I've had conversations, for example, with chief sales officers. And the conversations with the chief sales officers are, it always sounds like they want to know what the performance indicators are of sales leadership success beyond revenue, because they understand, revenue, yeah, number of clients, those are lagging indicators. They want to know what the leading indicators are. And they want to know why, maybe 10 or 15% of their collective sales leader audience is doing really, really well, and how they can be helpful to the rest, because they don't want to turn them over. It's just so very, very expensive, unless, of course, it's just a bad fit. Well, when you work with the new framework, and you honor that framework, for example, for a sales leadership role, you get to this very, very helpful place called you can talk to that chief sales officer, and you can start to say, well, if you want to know what the performance indicators of sales leadership success looks like in our organization, we can give you that data, right? What we found out is that and I'm going to hold up, I don't have the sale, I was actually going to pull that out for today. I was going to pull out the Rejuvi Red model, the Rejuvi sales model. I've got the Rejuvi lead model for senior leaders, but they can find out, oh, guess what? When you improve, this corridor right here, right? This new corridor, this kind of alignment corridor, new ways of working corridor, you improve that just by 1% collectively in your sales leader audience. In one of our clients, they found that their net new clients went up by 5%, right? And that's like ding, 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 ding. That's what that chief sales officer really wants to know. And that's how we can actually change the conversation around the learning and application has completely changed for building leadership capability. It's like exciting
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah.
Charlie, talk to us a little bit about some of the vision that you have around um, use cases to make this come alive, right? So, for example, when we talk about these three things that are creating this at the table moment for the development of our leadership capability inside an organization, the framework has changed, right? What leadership is different. The bench has changed. Who we're asking to lead is so much more expansive, and you better be helping those team leaders and sales leaders and service leaders as well. And the how, the learning and applications changed. So we have a platform that allows you to do all these things and to, in this fence post kind of way, help you to understand incremental change in relationship to your lagging indicators or your outcomes. But talk to us a little bit about the vision that you are now unpacking, right? It's real. And some of the use cases that we have that make this framework has changed, bench has changed, learning application has changed, come to life for a single leader.
Yeah, so I think we've had some really nice experiences applying Rejuvi with leadership teams across multiple industries, right? And we've seen the outcomes and the ability to equate the growth of those leaders to changes, favorable changes, usually in KPIs, OKRs, and driving key business results. But of course, we're a company of innovation, so we're always looking for what are the new things, how is this going to evolve, right? And I think when you talk about these kind of use cases and user stories about how people are going to consume leadership development going forward, there's going to be, it needs to be in the flow of work. For one, the patience level of people going to look for stuff is like just so rapidly eroding. I mean, if somebody can't put something into a prompt box, they're probably not going to potentially take the time to go start doing research and investigation. They're used to this very rapid ability to get questions answered, or hey, I have a difficult conversation coming up with an employee, how would you frame this, right? And I think you can put that into like ChatGPT today, but the problem is it's not going to have a lot of the rich data that, for example, we collect from a Rejuvi model perspective. It's also not going to have some of the rich kind of company specific information about like what are the objectives and what are people what's the company striving for from a goal perspective to help kind of craft that. So I think to put a finer point on it, this kind of vision of I'll say sophisticated self-service. It's not just about, hey, I'm going to be able to go self-serve like a training course. No, it's I'm going to get to a baseline of understanding about a model that I can use to be a better modern leader. And then when I'm using that in a day-to-day basis in the flow of work, I'm going to be able to actively interact kind of with assets and data that's going to allow me to be a more sophisticated and even better leader on a day-to-day basis. So
Mhm.
I hope that provide. So that's
Well,
how I think about it.
I think it is this, I wrote down your opening phrase, the way that we, consume things now, the speed at which we consume them. We have to make sure that what we release is in the flow of leader work, right? And so does it make sense? Yeah, it's kind of like it's not a go big or go home. It's like we believe you can go big and you can go home. That's how
Yeah.
exciting this is. And kind of what I've learned from this is the ways that we have helped our leaders in the past, and is, from a self-serve perspective, right? Is we put together maybe lists of courses, and these courses are, electronic, and we're still, for example, putting together our IDP, our individual development plan, and we're maybe choosing from courses, and then we're going to the electronic library, we're taking some courses. So there's been that. There's certainly been, other sorts of things that we do. But what we're talking about in terms of this next generation of actually growing our capability is completely different. And it's simply based on what you said. People do not have the patience. They don't, and they shouldn't have to have the patience for consuming learning the way that they've consumed it in the past. And it should be able to do the work for you. So for example, we understand from the run of fierce business piece of the modern leadership model, these four quadrants on the outside. And I know one of your favorite is strategic intent, right? Because it answers these questions, these basic questions called, where are we going and why are we going there? Where do we choose to play and how are we going to win, right? Your strategic intent should answer those questions for you. Well, one of the business practices that we know a really, really great leader has control of is, for example, a value proposition. And a value proposition isn't just a, tagline of, a marketing tagline. It's actually a body of work. And the body of work represents who are our consumers and who are our customers and what are their pains and what are their gains, the pains that they have and the gains they're trying to make. And how do we take care of those pains? How do we serve those gains, right? And
Mhm.
how does that interplay, dynamic nature between the customer's pains and gains, and the products and services of the organization, that should create some sort of competitive advantage, some differentiation in the market. The production of that value proposition as a body of work, as an outline to understand and to be able to talk to your people about, to talk to your customers about, that should actually be produced for you, right? It should be produced for you as a piece of the learning process, right? That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah. I mean, it should be a great, so intent, you're right. I do love that quadrant. I'll talk about the other one. I probably love equally, but in intent, there should be an initial production of it and then an iteration and ideation around it from a team perspective, right? Like
Right.
from all these different from
Yes,
all these
for
different data
sure.
sources, here's the likely intent. And now let's put our personal stamp on it, right? And then the other quadrant I love is implement because two of the questions in there are you know, how far and fast should we go, and can everybody bring their best? right? And the ability, what's it going to take for everybody to bring their best, right? Well, we can have an open discussion about that, but if that's supplemented with data from the model on how people are thinking about that based on some survey information we have coming out of Rejuvi, but also you can look at, you know, average hours worked in a week, and there's all these other data sources that indicate, are we going far and fast enough, or too far and too fast and we need to reset, or there's all kinds of different data points. And I think having a model that you can bump that up against, and then being able to dynamically bring that information back, and then it's people aren't spending their time searching for it and putting it all together. They're spending their time consuming it and iterating on it and making it their own, the team's own, the leader's own,
Yeah,
and I think that's really critical.
yeah. You surprised me a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I would not have guessed that short-term implementation was your other favorite piece. I mean, when you talked about it, I know that you really respond to how far and fast we go and can everybody bring their best. So that's logical, but I would have guessed that you said business unit intelligence, because for me, business unit intelligence is the place where strategic intent becomes real, and you create an environment where people can really start to, you know, innovate. And when you innovate, I think you serve the purpose of the organization, but you do it in a way that serves the purpose of the individual. Anyway, I just know
Yeah,
how
I think,
I just
yeah,
know how
it's
I just know how
yeah,
creative you are and how many great ideas you have and how excitable you
uh,
are.
yeah.
I would have guessed that that was your favorite quadrant, but
Yeah, and it's probably the reason I'm hypersensitive to the implement one is if you think about, there's still a lot of command and control out there, right?
oh
Leadership
yeah.
approach, and it's usually deadlines and how you doing the work and who's doing the work are dictated down. You
Mhm.
know, hey, Charlie, your team of XYZ technology implementers is going to deliver the following thing by this date, and you're like, well, that's like
Yeah,
nobody, you haven't
yeah,
dimensioned the work really enough
yeah.
to, or like why are we really, why does it have to, the intent of why you have to do this. I mean, all these things go together, but you can experience so much pain and undo all the other good work that you do in those quadrants if you're
If
dictating in
you're
the implement
yeah,
phase.
if your
Yeah,
implement is out of whack, I
yeah.
very much identify you. Well, we are due to wrap up, and what I would say is, this is just an exciting moment, I think, for business. This is an exciting moment for leadership. This is an exciting moment for the leadership development space, because we are having an at the table moment, right? And so many things are exciting. How we think about what leadership is, the framework has absolutely changed, and there are now models to help you to understand it so that you can start to communicate and grow these compassionate human leaders that are also fierce business leaders, right? The bench has changed. Who we pay to lead is now so exciting. It's like popping popcorn in all parts and pieces of the organization, right? And number three, the learning and application has absolutely changed. And you can now understand incremental growth in your leadership capability and correlate that to the lagging indicators inside your organization, right? Super exciting times. Charlie, thank you for being with us today. It's always good to have you here at least once a quarter to have your perspective as someone who is on the cutting edge of both technology and transformation. So that's fantastic. And thank you to everyone who is watching our recording, or who has checked in today, who are watching our recordings and watching our reels in the social media world. We appreciate it very much. Next time you watch it, bring a friend. We will be back. This is it for our March recordings. We will be back with session number 127 on April 3rd, and it is called Launch Boxes to Go. So we will see you then, and thanks to everyone for being here today.